Hello, what I would like to contribute to the discussion today is a rethinking of the term community for the digital context. When you think of community, particularly in the continental sociological tradition, the distinction that comes from German sociology between community and society is still prevalent. So we see community on the one hand as these integrated, village-like, complete social institutions where everybody knows everyone and everybody's related to everyone on a lot of different levels, kind of familiar levels, economic levels, religious levels, cultural levels, and all this is one big integrated kind of entity. On the other hand, we have society, which is separated into different areas. So we have economy, we have politics, we have the social, we have the private, we have the public, and all these different areas are not really connected to each other except for relatively thin connections, say through contracts, monetary flows also. So if someone does something in one area, say in the economy, he or she doesn't have to worry about the effects on other areas, say the environment or social life, because these are functionally separated. This has, so goes the theory, led to enormous dynamization of society, because the old model of community was a static model that was so complicated that it was impossible to innovate, because one change in one area would have required adjustments in all others. So we have this idea that communities on the one hand are relatively static entities, small-scale entities, while society on the other hand is large-scale, differentiated, highly dynamic kind of network or set of entities. What we are seeing today, the crisis, can also be read or interpreted as a crisis of this model. We clearly see that it is no longer possible to separate different areas. Most obviously, it's no longer possible to separate the economy from other areas of social life, and it's no longer possible to separate the economy from ecology. So we have all kinds of negative effects, like externalities that manifest themselves in global warming, in environmental degradation. But we also, on the other hand, have the effects that we are apparently seeing economic progress in places like Greece again, while the society is devastated by the effects of that. Against this separation and this crisis, what we have seen is a resurgence of communities, particularly digital communities or communities mediated by digital technologies that allowed these communities to become much bigger than traditional local communities that tended to be fairly small. But these communities are very different from the traditional communities, so it's kind of misleading to think of them in the same way. What is perhaps the most, or perhaps first what is similar and then what is different. What is similar is that they are also not functionally separated. If you take, for example, a free software project, here we have technical aspects, we have social aspects, we have institutional aspects, so how are these things governed, we have economic aspects, how are people and the projects reproduce themselves, all mix into one. And you cannot say that one is more important than the other. They are all negotiated all the time together. So what does it do if we do commercial sponsoring? What does it do to the community? What does it do to other aspects? So we have, similar to traditional communities, social entities where what used to be separated spheres of life are again fused into one big complex entity. But what is starkly different, and I think what makes me very hopeful that these institutions, these new communities can actually be a source of liberation, is that contrary to the village environment, nobody is born into these communities, and these communities, they are all based on voluntary association. Again, if you take a free software project, nobody in these projects has the means of coercion to force anyone to work on an aspect that he or she is not interested in. And these projects work best as long as everyone attributes authority to some project leader or project leader group, because they see their own particular individual interests best served by these leaders, by these people who know best how to steer the project. And if this trust in the leadership is eroded, then these communities have the possibility to fork, to move to another set of governance structures, or choose another leader that again embodies the will of the community. So we have communities that are based on voluntary associations and not on means of coercion. That does not mean, as I said, that they are not internally stratified, they don't have leadership, but the leadership structure is a different one. It's one by attribution rather than one by coercion. The other aspect that I think differentiates these new communities from other sets of communities is that even though they are complex institutions that combine and relate different aspects of life, as I said, political, economic, social, technical aspects of life into one big integrated thing, these are still relatively partial communities. So contrary to the village, where you with all your aspects are always in one single community, in these digital communities or these digitally mediated communities, you can be in different communities at the same time. That makes it in the end easier, if you no longer feel represented or feel welcome in one community, to move, because you don't have to leave all your connections behind. You are just leave those of that particular community. So you can be part of a software community, you can also be part of a local co-op, you can be part of a, let's say a community on certain music interests or whatever. So these communities are integrated full organizations and modes of organizations, but they always represent or demand from you a partial commitment. So there's multiplicity of communities that again guard against this oppressive element that traditional communities always also had. And the third difference that I think is really crucial is that in the traditional way of differentiating community and society, communities are static and society is dynamic for the reasons that I mentioned. But what we see now is that this mode of self-attribution, the mode of voluntary association, is actually much better suited for complex tasks, for knowledge-intensive tasks, where people know best where their own skills are and what they can contribute. So often, we see this in science, but we also see it in software, but we also see it in other areas, these communities are actually really dynamic, because they make best use and they can best mobilize the resources that each of their members can bring in. And these three elements, the dynamism, the partial nature, so they're no longer single communities that encompass all of your life, actually make these a very new type of communities that are much better suited to address the challenges that we are facing, the challenges both economic but also ecological and social. And I think they are also very well suited to knowledge-intensive, complex environments. The problem we are having today is that the crisis is accelerated and deepened and made more extreme by forces that that want to cling to the old paradigms, to the old divisions, say economic versus social versus ecological, and try to solve their individual problems at the expense of everybody else. We see this in the financial industry that demands debt to be repaid, even though it's clearly unsustainable and devastating to society is affected. We also see it in the extractive industry, where there's a renewed push to solve the crisis of energy and the ecological crisis, or not to solve the crisis, but to solve the economic elements by making the ecological crisis worse for everyone else. And I think against this background, it's a strong need to develop these new models of community further and really strengthen them as an alternative to the clearly devastating models of industrial organizations that we still see all around and are now being reasserted with such a vengeance.